Diontae Johnson revealed why he refused to enter a game for the Ravens last year, and now I'm even less confident that he's going to make it through the season with the Browns in 2025. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. If you thought Diontae Johnson may not be long for Cleveland already, if you had your doubts, wait until you hear why he refused to enter a game last year. How the Browns are to blame for a revelatory discovery of collusion in the NFL, and I'm coming around to the idea that Cleveland actually might keep all four quarterbacks, but it still seems unlikely. I do want to thank you for being in every day at the Locked On Browns podcast, making this your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free to you. Just hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you get your podcast, and of course at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in that comment section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And Diontae Johnson, I don't know the exact platform he was on. It sounds like he made an appearance on the Sports and Suits podcast, and he dropped this nugget about why he didn't enter a game for the Ravens last year, which is the big knock against him right now. The thing that he believes he was misunderstood and misrepresented for when he spoke to us in the media here in Cleveland several weeks ago. You know, that it was one bad year where there was some tumultuous times and that he got mislabeled because of this. And I argued a couple weeks back as well, like, listen, if you don't enter a game, you are labeled a quitter, and that is one of the hardest labels to shake in the NFL, just flat out, or really in sports in general. Once you're labeled somebody who isn't going to, you know, put yourself in the line for your teammates and you're just going to like quit, that's a hard thing to shake. And so it's not surprising that he enters this year with people doubting whether or not he's going to be bought in. And then you get this explanation as to why this happened. And I'll read it to you here, but this doesn't or shouldn't necessarily give anybody confidence that he's going to make it through the season with the Browns. He said, quote, "I wasn't getting into no run plays, no passing plays or nothing. It was cold. End of the third, going into the fourth, they were like, Tay, we need you. I was like, nah, I don't think it's a good idea for me. Like, my legs are already ice cold, and I didn't want to go out there and put bad stuff on film. It's not like I didn't want to go into the game, but leading up to this point, I had been through so much. I told them I'm not finna go in, so I just sat on the bench, and that's why they suspended me." First of all, the fact that he makes this sound like he was like a victim here, like they were like, oh, they really wanted me to go in, and God forbid, I didn't want to put anything bad on tape, so I said like, nah, it's probably not a good idea for me to go in. Like he's the victim in all this, and then they suspended me, like the audacity to suspend me. I mean, listen, it's a wild stance for Diontae Johnson to take, that he feels like, you know, it was like this is how football works. This is how sports works. Like, he didn't have a prominent role on this team, obviously. The Ravens sort of took a chance on bringing him in, thinking like, hey, we need wide receiver help. Let's add this guy who's done some things at the NFL level and who we feel like can be a piece for us because we're trying to chase a Super Bowl. And it wasn't a bad thought at the time, but then this all sort of unfolded, and it was like, okay, and that's why Diontae Johnson is now labeled the way that he's labeled. But for the excuse to just simply be, man, it was cold, I wasn't playing, I didn't want to go in, like that's not enough. Like, stay loose on the sidelines. Like that's the argument for you're in a cold environment and you're playing and you're worried that you might pull. Like I get the player safety part of it where it's like, hey man, it's cold outside. You don't want to pull a muscle. Okay, fine. But at the same time, like just because it's cold outside, you know what you sign up for in those situations. You know some of these stadiums are going to be outdoor environments, so you got to play in the cold, and you just suck it up and go in. I don't like, and for him to cite like, yeah, I didn't want to put anything bad on film. Like, dude, then don't put anything bad on film. Like the worst. Okay, here's the thing. You didn't want to put anything bad on film on the field. The worst thing you can do is to not put anything on film and say, no, I'm not going into the game, because there's a reason, as Diontae Johnson admitted to us in the media here in Cleveland, why nobody was calling. It's because of this incident primarily. He got one call. Him and his representatives got one call from the Cleveland Browns, and that's why he's here. Because in retrospect, like, this is probably his last chance. This is probably his chance to sort of save his NFL career, if you will. And he's getting a chance to do it here in Cleveland, where, by the way, the Browns play in cold weather. They might not be playing in cold weather by 2029 with the Brook Park project, but for the next 4 years, they're playing in cold weather. So, like, you might have a situation where you're out there in the cold this year in November, and what are you going to say then? Are you going to say, yeah, well, they haven't played me much this game, I'm not going out? Like, I don't understand the thought process there, where it's like, I didn't want to put something bad on tape, so I said I wasn't going to go in. He thought that was a better alternative than going out and maybe dropping a pass or maybe not looking like your best. I don't understand. There was a better chance that if you went out there and you just like struggled a little bit, that somebody would at least still see what you used to, like, what you had done previously, and been like, okay. But once you're labeled, as I've said before, once you're labeled as the guy who won't go into games, once you're labeled as the guy who essentially quit on your team, teams aren't going to sign up for that. Teams aren't going to just be willing to hire you with that. And I think that's part of the reason, that's the biggest reason why he wasn't getting calls this offseason from teams, and why the Browns are the only team that called, and why he's here in Cleveland right now. So if you had doubts already that Diontae Johnson was long for Cleveland, or that he was going to make this roster and actually give like an effort that felt like, he could turn into something. And listen, I do like, I see the concept here from Andrew Berry with a wide receiver room that doesn't have a lot of talent. They didn't have a lot of money to spend, so you knew they weren't going to go spend big. You probably knew some big trade wasn't in the cards, although they still could make a trade. They tried to make a trade last year for Brandon Ayuk. Like, I'm not saying that's not possible, but given how the offseason played out, given where they were financially, I understood, and I don't think like this is a bad signing for the Browns. Like, I'm not criticizing the Browns here for doing it, because it is like a potential low risk, high reward situation. If Diontae Johnson doesn't stick, you cut him. You don't owe him anything. No one's the wiser. If he does stick, you get a guy that can be a productive wide receiver at the NFL level, a guy who was a Pro Bowler at one point. Like, he put that on tape when he was with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So there's reason for optimism that could happen. And I've talked about that on the show. Like, if he sticks, if he can stay on the straight and narrow, and he isn't, making boneheaded decisions like, I'm not going to go into a game, then yeah, I see the view here where he could become a piece for the Browns that they rely on this year. And that would be huge. I think that would be awesome if that happens. But if you had any doubts about that happening, and had any doubts about him being bought in, and had any, if you were concerned about what happened last year and if that was just who he was or whatever, and he says it's not, this doesn't help the situation when you find out that it was about being cold, not wanting to put bad tape out there. And so he just said, I'm not going into the game. I'm not really warmed up. It's cold outside. Dude, you're playing in Cleveland. It's going to be cold outside for a handful at least of games this season, especially in December. You're playing Chicago in December this year. Like, it's going to be cold. Are you not going to go into games then? I found this mind-boggling, and I continue to be just surprised at the idea that, like, he thinks he was misrepresented here. Like, he made the conscious decision to not go into a game. Whatever the reason was, which we just found out about, fine. But I just can't wrap my head around, like, the idea that somehow, some way he believes that maybe, it was the right decision to say, I'm not going out there because I don't want to look bad on tape, and that he thought basically quitting in a game was better for his career trajectory. It's crazy. And like I said, if you were already worried about Diontae Johnson being long for Cleveland, this just adds more reason to sort of doubt that it's gonna be a relationship that even maybe makes it through the entirety of the 2025 season. Collusion uncovered in the NFL, and the Browns are at the center of it. I dissect the findings from Pablo Torre and Mike Florio. A lot to unpack here. It could be a little bit of a longer segment, but there's some important details you need to get into. So I will talk about it here coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra and Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them yourself. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, It's time to meet Rougiette Ready. Rougiette Ready is the next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rougiette's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, an average of 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options just aren't working for you, Rougiette might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to rougiette.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but not FDA approved, and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit Rougiette's website for full safety information. This next segment is going to be a bit of a doozy because there's a lot to unpack here from the story that came out yesterday. I mentioned it at the end of yesterday's show that I'd be getting into this, and I spent the last 24 hours or so listening to the podcast Pablo Torre Finds Out, also reading through some of the document itself, reading through what Pablo Torre and Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk had to say about it and why this matters. And so essentially what transpired here is that after the Browns, and this is why it's an interesting topic here for the podcast, because the Browns are at the center of all this idea that there was collusion going on in the NFL. Because they gave Deshaun Watson the fully guaranteed $230 million contract in March of 2022, it triggered this discussion from this NFL management council that exists to sort of oversee how owners are doing things and give recommendations on how things should be done in these closed door settings. I think that sort of occurs at the owners meetings is the understanding that I get, because it sounded like this was talked about at the owners meetings in 2022 after this deal had been handed out, just days after this deal had been handed out. And so essentially there was a conversation had from this NFL management council to limit the amount of to basically put do the best they can to block fully guaranteed contracts being a thing. And this is something that the NFLPA has tried to fight for in several CBA negotiations. They did it in 2011, they did it in 2020, and both times it failed. And so now you get a contract to a quarterback in Deshaun Watson that's fully guaranteed. And usually when these contracts, like we always talk about the next quarterback sets the market for, the quarterback after him, right? And so like as the salaries go up, that's kind of how that process plays out. And so you would think a fully guaranteed contract would have set the market for how quarterback contracts are done in the future, and that would mean other quarterbacks would get fully guaranteed deals now because Deshaun got it first. But that was not the case, because this NFL Management Council met to discuss basically crusading against handing out fully guaranteed contracts and not making this the norm, and trying to limit the amount of guaranteed money that they gave to quarterbacks that were due up for contracts that year and coming up, like Lamar Jackson, like Kyler Murray, and like Russell Wilson, who apparently thought Russell Wilson, that is, he was going to get a 7-year fully guaranteed deal. I forget the exact number off the top of my head, from the Broncos when he was traded there, and it didn't happen. And so that led to some other sort of back end stuff where J.C. Tretter, former Cleveland Browns center, who was the president of the NFLPA from a player's representative standpoint, bashed Russell Wilson for not getting the fully guaranteed contract. And so that's part of the reason why it seems like the NFLPA didn't want this leaked and didn't want this out there. So that's another interesting wrinkle to all of this. But the part I want to focus on for this conversation right now is just the fact that this went to an arbitration hearing. There was interviews conducted. There was statements made. I believe Jimmy Haslam was part of it, from what I could understand from reading it. Those 3 quarterbacks were part of it. And there was other owners involved. And so Droney is the judge who ruled on this, the arbiter that ruled on this. He's a former federal judge. And he found that the evidence introduced at the 2024 hearing, because this happened last year, did not, by, quote, clear preponderance of evidence, show that teams accepted and acted on the encouragement of the NFL Management Council to collude against giving fully guaranteed deals. And so he was taking the word of like the 8 owners that were interviewed who said like, no, we weren't doing this and we didn't subscribe to this and whatever. But we all remember when Lamar Jackson was up for a deal, they got like one team like reached, like nobody called. Nobody wanted to reach out as an unrestricted or as a restricted free agent rather to Lamar Jackson to offer him a deal. And so basically what Droney ruling that there was not a clear preponderance of evidence means is like he accepted the excuses of, yeah, trading for or acquiring Lamar Jackson would have meant like all these teams had to change their offense, and he gets injured a lot, which were things that like people like Arthur Blank, owner of the Falcons, basically argued in this setting and said this is why teams weren't interested in Lamar Jackson. I find that hard to believe. He said he was a 2-time MVP. What are we talking? Or he won the MVP that next year. What are we talking about? And so that was the final ruling was that yes, the NFL basically won the arbitration hearing because they weren't accused of collusion in a court of this arbiter's rule. But he also ruled, Droney, that there is little question that the NFL Management Council, with the blessing of Commissioner Goodell, encouraged the 32 NFL clubs to reduce guarantees to veterans contracts at that March 2022 annual owners meeting. So he even though he said there wasn't evidence of collusion, he still ruled that the owners did talk about it and that there was an encouragement from this management council for the 32 clubs to reduce guarantees in veterans contracts and make that a thing. There's text messages exchanged in this document. It's 61 pages between owners who are saying, hey, your deal's going to help us. Thanks for doing that. And that's like so bizarre because one of the other arguments made by, I think it was John Mara, the Giants owner, was that like, can you imagine if I texted Jerry Jones and said like, hey, thanks for helping me out with my quarterback contract? He would think I was crazy. Or if I asked him not to give Dak Prescott a fully guaranteed deal or whatever, he would think I'm nuts. And it's like, clearly you guys are texting about this stuff all the time because there's evidence of it happening. And so the bottom line in all this is, and it is ironic that it all started with the Browns and the Deshaun Watson deal, which and how that deal had ripple effects for the organization, but also ripple effects now for the NFL. And you wonder what it means for the Browns and Jimmy Haslam's willingness to hand out fully guaranteed deals in the future. Because there is a level of this. It's like, well, sorry, get your money up. Like if Jimmy Haslam's wanted to do this, sorry to you. And if he does it in the future, which I think he probably still would be inclined to do so if it's the right player, sorry, like too bad for you. You get more money, get an owner who's willing to do it. But regardless, like where this all kind of comes together and meets is you think about like in a court with a jury court or a jury trial where it's 12 people ruling on the case. And essentially like where there's not a clear preponderance of evidence to rule on there being a full evidence of colluding. To me, that just speaks to it's hard to prove collusion. It's a very difficult thing to prove, even in a court of law, right? Or even in this arbitration hearing. So I think that's fine. But even the acceptance that there was in the ruling that there was little question that this management council said this and tried to encourage owners to do this, that does speak to the fact that collusion is going on behind the scenes in some capacity, whether you believe it or not. And he couldn't bring himself to sort of ruling on it in a way where he was going to say like, NFL, you did something wrong here because there wasn't enough evidence. Okay, so fine. But here's the thing, like, as I was saying with like the jury trials, you talk about a jury trial and how for that jury to make a decision on guilty, innocent, or otherwise, they need it's the phrase of beyond a reasonable doubt, right? If one person leaves that courtroom and goes to the deliberation room and believes like, no, I have doubt in my mind that this person did it, then they get found innocent. Like everybody has to agree. And so you try to sway the people back on your side, like, or it becomes a mistrial and you have to try again. Like this was an arbitration hearing. There was no jury, but as you think about like beyond a reasonable doubt, the evidence proposed in the final sort of conclusion that's drawn from this article or from the article, but also from the document basically means that like in the court of public opinion. So me, you, other NFL fans who might care about this stuff, to me, there is doubt. Like, to me, the findings leave doubt where in this instance, it was an arbiter who's deciding the fate. But if it had been a jury trial, Are all those jurors walking away like, yeah, man, there was nothing shady going on here? I don't think so. I think this proves that there's collusion going on in the NFL, and there's at least a statement from Droney in there that they did discuss it. And so that's where I think it's interesting, because in the court of public opinion, there is now doubt. There like beyond a reasonable doubt doesn't exist right now. If there is reason to now have in the back of your mind a thought of future instances where we're going to point and say, well, hey, could they be colluding on this? And we've seen it in other instances as well. Like the findings in this case basically put at least some doubt in the minds of NFL fans that collusion could be happening, year to year, whatever, season to season in the NFL, and that these owners, as the powerful men that they are, can sort of conspire to do whatever, control things the way that they want to control things with the guidance of this management council that apparently exists. And so if they can collude on guaranteed contracts for players, they can collude on other things, like Shedeur Sanders sliding to the 5th round. I'm not trying to be inflammatory here, but like, I questioned why that happened. There's so many scouts out there, so many former scouts who are now NFL analysts who have said continually, so most teams had him as a day 2 guy. So how's he end up going in the 5th round? I think it was teams trying to prove a point. There was discussions had on like how that meeting with the Giants went and that they were rubbed the wrong way by what Shedeur said and did. Okay, if they talked about that and the owners met about it and there was, conversations had and they were like, you know what, we need to humble this guy a little bit, that would maybe explain why he goes in the 5th round. The Colin Kaepernick situation, which I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but it's another instance of where we've had questions about whether or not there's collusion going on in this sport. So what this creates in conclusion is that one of the NFL's biggest boogeymans in this sort of belief that this type of stuff was going on is now unmasked. And now it has a face that we can point to and say, well, if this was going on, so why can't this go on? And we'll do this forever. I would point to it. I'm sure you would point to it. There's always conspiracy theories going on out there in politics and sports and otherwise. And this now opens up this can of worms where that can happen at every turn, anytime we think that it's happening, because we now have evidence that it at least was going on in some small capacity before. And so fans will be able to point and say collusion for any number of things is going on, and that it looks suspicious for this thing, for that thing, whatever it might be. And that's why this is so fascinating. But I found it interesting that the Browns are kind of at the center of this, obviously, with the Deshaun Watson thing, and that triggered these conversations and the ripple effects from that. But also J.C. Treader being the union president while he was here in Cleveland, like that was a big part of the story. And I encourage everybody to go read more on it, because I couldn't get into every little detail and nook and cranny of this thing in a short amount of time this podcast offers me. But I think the point I was trying to make here was made. And like I said, go read through it, because you'll get even more information. And there was some revelatory stuff in there. I'll also say this. I don't think it's like overall surprising to people, because I think people suspected this anyway. But I do think that now you have like I said, the unmasked boogeyman, where you can say, now we know what's going on. And what else are they conspiring on behind or colluding on behind the scenes? No collusion happening as far as the Cleveland Browns are concerned that we think with the quarterback situation. But I'll tell you, the Browns keeping 4 quarterbacks, I know I poo-pooed it a couple weeks back. It seems to be gaining momentum. Will they actually do it, though? We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Do you ever wish managing your money felt just easier overall? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. My wife and I have been trying to get some bigger projects done around the house this summer. Plus, because it's the summer, we wanted to take a trip or two, and we needed to get a better look at our financial picture, where we could save some money to do the things that we want to do. And Monarch Money has made managing our money together smoother than ever. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. So I know I talked several weeks back about the idea of the Browns keeping all 4 of their quarterbacks that are involved in this competition. And I poo-pooed it back then. I still feel in my heart of hearts it's not going to happen, and I'll explain why here coming up. But the idea that they would keep 4 has seemed to gain some momentum this week from a number of different people. There are different reporters who are leaning in this direction, thinking that it could happen. There are other just insiders who are sort of predicting that they could see it being the way that it happens. And I'll say this, like, I can see it potentially happening on a couple different fronts. If for nothing else, it's the Browns, and this organization is as unpredictable as hell. They do random things sometimes that make no sense. We've seen that over the years. And so maybe they would keep 4 just based off of that. Also, the last couple of years, they've had so many quarterback injuries. Maybe they view it as valuable to keep 4 quarterbacks this year and just kind of see where the chips fall and have this crop of talent that they can sort of sort through and figure out. And they start different guys at different times and they try some different things. And so maybe it could happen that way. Maybe Andrew Berry doesn't get any bites on a trade and he's like, you know what, we'll keep these guys and see if we can make it to the trade deadline to move one and get the value out of it that way, whether it's Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco or whoever. So those are sort of the avenues that I think paint the picture of they could consider it. And ultimately, like when you have 4 quarterbacks, you don't really have a definitive starter, a guy that you feel great about moving forward in the future. And I think that somebody like Shedeur Sanders or even Dylan Gabriel could disprove that a little bit, probably more so Shedeur, because I think he's the most talented guy in the roster, as I've said numerous times. But like right now, they're sitting there like, we don't really have a foundational starter right now. So let's just keep all 4 and see who emerges and who earns their keep and who earns the opportunities and go from there. Again, all valid reasons to at least consider or think about or discuss why the Browns might do something far-fetched like keep 4 quarterbacks. And so I've come around to the idea that this could happen. I could see this team doing it come the end of August. But the reason I'd still bet against it is that sitting here today, I am still going to assume that there will be a quarterback injury of some sort where a team loses a quarterback and the Browns have a surplus to trade and they go flip one for some sort of draft capital. I'm not saying it's going to be like Flacco for a 2nd round pick. That would be ridiculous. But like Kenny Pickett for a 5th or a 6th, like something like that. Like who knows? Who knows what you could get in a situation where a team's desperate and they're looking for somebody to sort of steady the waters. Even if a backup quarterback gets hurt and a team feels like they need one. I've pinpointed and looked at the Saints, and I had Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints on, last month talking about, or was it earlier this month? I don't know. At this point, June and the summer months are all just kind of blurring together. But I had Ross Jackson on several weeks, several shows ago. I guess it's more than several, but you get the idea, to talk about the idea of like the Saints being a suitor for one of these quarterbacks. And the whole premise was based on, listen, their quarterback room is really young. They got a rookie. They got a 2nd-year guy in Spencer Rattler. They got Jake Hayner. Like that room has no veteran experience right now. And maybe they look and say by the time training camp is done, we need a veteran. Or maybe one of those guys looks so bad that they're like, we need a better backup quarterback than we have right now. And then they call it the Browns and say, what's it going to take to get Kenny Pickett? Like something like that could play out. Something like that could happen. And there's a number of other teams that maybe can make some sense for Flacco or Pickett in that regard. Or maybe the Browns would be inclined to move one of these rookies. I don't think that's going to happen because I think they're going to, if they're going to keep anybody around and invest in anybody and try to, find something in somebody, it's going to be the guys that are rookies, that are young, that have potential and ceilings that have been untapped at this point to sort of get a clearer picture of where they're at with their quarterback situation going into 2026 when they might end up drafting another one. But the only thing I feel comfortable saying right now is like, I think Dylan Gabriel is guaranteed to make this roster because he's the guy the Browns fell in love with clearly during the pre-draft process. So much so that they were sitting up there gushing about him after the draft. And even though they took him in the 3rd round, they feel pretty highly of him. I think he's on this roster. And frankly, Andrew Berry's not giving up on a 3rd round pick. I also would say it's about a 98% chance, 97, 98% chance that Shedeur Sanders is on this roster. Because A, I think he's the most talented. B, of all the quarterbacks. B, he's also an Andrew Berry pick. And even though he's a 5th rounder, based on how they drafted him, again, I'm not saying he should have been a 5th round pick, but where they drafted him, Andrew Berry still isn't going to give up, I don't think, on a 1st round pick, especially in year 1, especially if he proves to be the more talented guy. So I think both those guys are on this roster. and neither get really traded. And it comes down to the veterans, right? And that's the conversation we've been having. Who's the odd man out between them? Maybe they look at this thing and decide we're going to keep both. We'll let one start, pivot to the other one, and then at some point maybe we can trade one at the deadline and just focus on the rookies for the rest of the season if the season really goes south quickly. But sitting here today, I still feel like they don't keep all four. That said, would I be surprised if the Browns do? No, because it's the Browns and they've done crazy things before, and they might just decide, you know what? We feel good about all these guys and what they showed in training camp. We don't want to give up on any of them, and we'll just kind of ride this thing out during the season and play different quarterbacks at different times and see what happens. Let the chips fall where they may, if you will. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. More to come this week. I'm hoping for Thursday to connect with my guy, Earl the Pearl. If you listen to me on 92 The Fan, you know Earl and I do a Saturday show together. We won't be together this Saturday because he's out of town, but really excited to connect with Earl and talk a bunch of Brown stuff together. And that should be a fun show. And I'm sure we'll have some other great stuff to sort of round out the week here and really round out the month of June. So please hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting, or as always, you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being on every day or at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.